All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Benjamin, and welcome back to the weekly updates of the presidential election and the model specifically. And today there's actually been a little bit of movement from what we've seen, which has been Donald Trump having a slight edge according to my model. And what we now see is this is not looking good for Trump if we're 100% honest. And there's a few reasons for that. So what I'm going to go is I'm going to look into the model and I'm going to show you what the numbers look like and then talk about the implications with the map as the background, right? So what we're looking at here is about a 4.2% gap, and that's nationally. Trump, of course, getting a slight advantage due to both incumbency and the economy, which is doing well. I think the stock market's kind of just not happy with the China situation, which I have my own opinions about what we should do regarding China and trade. And uh, truth is, I don't think they're going to respond to this at all because China just doesn't care. Because they're going to do whatever benefits them the most, and it doesn't matter what treaties they sign, they're just going to do whatever they do regardless. So basically, we should just ignore them and say we're going to focus on things that actually matter, people who are actually going to hold up their end of the bargain if we actually go with them. So it could be much worse if I wasn't giving him fundamentals. And remember, these are going to start declining in importance as we get closer to Election Day. The first winnowing of this is going to probably occur at the end of this calendar year. I could push it to Election Day this year, or basically put it a year out where I'm going to start really focusing on declining it. But I think pushing it back to 2020 is a better decision, in my opinion, simply because it's going to allow me to just wait until we actually get a lot more polling data, because that's when we're going to start getting a lot more general election matchups and a lot better general election polling, meaning that I'm going to be able to actually take away the fundamentals of this model a little bit more, and I'm also going to see if I can find a way to reduce the effect of the approval rating to a degree in the model, and just try and wean it off of fundamentals. It's at the start of the next year, at the start of 2020, just because that's the best way to do it, because right now we just don't have a lot of pollsters polling. We've got a few pollsters going through, but we get a lot of repeats. We don't have every single pollster polling, a lot of different matchups. So if we go to the likelihood, the approval rating, right now we're sitting at about what we've been sitting for the past, for most of the time. There's been some differences, obviously, but for the most part, we're within that 1% band that we've come to expect. So I don't think that's anything too outside the norm. 2016 is still going to factor in, but with each passing day and with each passing poll, the amount it's contributing to the model is lessening further and further and further and further. Okay? So if we go to the national polls, I collapsed all of them down, and well, this is going to change a lot as we get more. I finally figured out which ones were quarter two. I actually just collapsed all of them because I kind of screwed up, and plus, I just decided right now it's good enough. They're all going to, by the end of this quarter, which I guess is going to be, I guess at the end of next month, it's going to wind up factoring in the exact same amount, so it really doesn't matter. So grain of salt, I could go through and figure out which ones were from when I was supposed to do it, but this is good enough for right now, because I kind of got caught up in doing a lot of things. For the record, I think I'm. I think maybe I do a bit too much stuff just in my life in general. Day job. I have. I do 2 bowling leagues a week. I help run a chess club in my area, as well as organize and run tournaments for that club. Um, so that's an average of about 1 day a week, but I about every month we host a tournament. Um, yeah, yeah. Then there's the whole situation where, uh, uh, of course, I do this, but I also play the guitar. I have I have 3 of them, so it's kind of useful. I kind of have to practice it, or else it's just a waste of time, and it would have been a waste of a lot of money. Would have been a waste of a lot of money. After that, um, what else? I mean, obviously, I'm doing this, and this takes a lot of time. I actually have to keep up to date with everything. Um, that's that's a lot of time that I spend, and of course, I have to make sure that the place I live in is clean because I'm the only one living here, and you know that's kind of important. I like to cook, so basically, I just don't have time. So sometimes things will slip, but I do my best not to make sure that doesn't happen. And if I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm not going to talk too much about my own personal life outside of my hobbies and that type of stuff. But you know, there there may or may not be other there may not be people in my life who I like to spend time with and be a good person. As I like to joke with some of my friends, I am from Georgia. I have certain standards to uphold. But yeah, so anyway, long story short, while Donald Trump has had a little bit of an improvement from quarter one and quarter two, basically, so have the Democrats, mostly because we're talking about, again, small sample size, but that's because of the uh, basically turning data points into an average. So forgiveness is necessary for that, just because of the way it works out. So expect this number to change a little bit, but we're already starting to see that people are figuring out where they're going to eventually go. I think that's a big takeaway from that. Anyway, let's go to the map and start talking a little bit about the implications. So Texas is definitely becoming a competitive state. I think it's fair to call it a red-leaning state instead of a red state. It's a red-leaning state. I wouldn't quite call it a battleground. I wouldn't quite call it a swing state just yet. I want to see more. I want to see more competitive races at the state level. And this could just be a Donald Trump thing, or it could actually be a harbinger of the future. I think it's a little bit of both. It's a little column A, a little column B. I think Donald Trump's accelerating the process. But here's the interesting thing. The upper Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they are not moving, and of course a little bit of Iowa and Ohio too. They're, in years past, if Arizona was going blue, well, this was going to be safe for the Democrats. You wouldn't even be talking about these being competitive states. I've probably said this before. Montana, Missouri, South Carolina, they're on the edge of what I consider competitive, at least based off the model as it's currently set in. Utah, similar issue there. Arizona, of course, is just over the line for the Democrats, so take it as is. And And with a 4.2% lead, I could actually see Arizona flipping, and these states would be this map actually does make sense for a 4.2% lead by the Democrats. Now, here's the thing: I expect third-party voting to actually decline, and I think most third-party voting was anti-Trump rather than were people who normally vote Republican or would have normally voted Republican but hated Donald Trump. So I think Donald Trump does have ground to gain from 2016, but it's going to be from people who didn't like him in 16, which isn't to say that it's impossible. There was a recent article in the New York Times, and there's another article in the New York Times that I'm tempted to talk about, but you know what? I am going to say that I forget which one that I wanted to do, but the point is, it was some good analysis. I think there were some things they got wrong in both, but there was a lot more that they got right. And I think people give the New York Times a really hard time, either for being, I don't know how anybody could say that they're in favor of Trump, biased towards Trump, but whatever. And of course, I don't think they're as anti-Donald Trump as some people, as a lot of Republicans, and especially Donald Trump, would claim. I think the problem is people take editorials and letters to the editor too seriously, as from the perspective of, oh, this is obviously what the newspaper stands for. No. The typical journalism side is just going to report the facts as is for the most part. There's going to be minimal amounts of commentary, and you can typically figure out what the commentary is rather than what's being reported. Editorials and letters to the editor, those are strictly opinion. Yes, they may have some facts to back up their claims, but they're typically going to be spun in a certain way. For example, someone who wants to prove that guns are the problem, and I'm just using that as an example that's easy for me to talk about, where, I would argue that I have some expertise from both a rhetorical standpoint, historical standpoint, and I would make the argument that I have a logical base for that, but, now I'm not going to say I have a legal base because I am not trained as a lawyer. And I think it would be wrong and dishonest for me to claim that. Now, that said, there are some very good lawyers who agree with me and my points, but, someone who is against civilian gun ownership would say something along the lines of, or wants stricter gun control. They would they would argue that, oh, you've got this many deaths attributed to gunshot wounds. They call them gun deaths. And you've got, this statistic, this statistic, this statistic. And of course, they're going to take them out of context. But that's the point. They're writing an opinion piece. It's their job to make it seem like their argument is correct. And sometimes you're going to take context out. Now, I will admit that if I was writing a letter to the editor, I would do something similar, because I have to paint my side of the argument as correct. And sometimes that means you have to just report numbers, and you're going to take a little bit of context out, especially if you don't want to bore people with numbers and statistics and breakdowns and all that stuff. For example, I would say, yes, but we only had this many homicides in the United States. This many were attributed to this weapon, and I would go through it without going too into the weeds. And I would state that this means we have a rate of this much, which is in line with the rest of the developed world, which is correct. Our homicide rate is in line with that of the rest of the world, with the rest of the developed world at the very least. And actually, it's slightly above average in that regard. And I would make the argument that if guns were the problem, and if guns made us an inherently more violent society, and gun ownership contributed to higher levels of crime, we would see something different than that statistical breakdown. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, saying that the New York Times does more right than it does wrong. And that's not going to earn me a lot of fans. Anyway, enough about my rambling. The big story is we're just waiting for more data, really, with the model. But it is starting to finally do what I expected it to do, which is show a reasonable portrait based off of the polling data that we're going to be getting. And I'm very happy that my model is actually able to move in a way that I expect it to. It means I, number one, developed it well. Number two, it means that I can actually read my own model. And number three, it means that my intuition is actually doing well in this regard based off of polling data, which is a good thing. Now, I'm going to argue that Donald Trump is still the favorite to win the election despite what my model is saying, but that's based off of factors that the model really just can't account for if I wanted to maintain as much objectivity as I could in the model. So anyway, as always, if you likes, comments, subscriptions really do help me. Useful links are in the description, and I want y'all to have a nice day. Take it easy, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.